It is an extra Hussein Mohammed, and this is what we are following for you this morning. Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich will today outline how the government will finance the highest budget estimates in Kenya's history, an ambitious 2.62 trillion shilling budget, already facing a deficit of 900 billion shillings. How will the government plug that hole? We analyze the budget for you throughout the day, what it means for you, and the key allocations across the sectors. You can see in studio we have Senator Mandera County Biloker, also the chair of the Finance Committee of the Senate, MP Makau Mulu, Kitui Central, also member of the Budget Committee of the National Assembly, and Anzet Sewere, who's the development economist, will be analyzing this for you throughout the day, also this morning.
Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka, the former Vice President, will not be deputy to anybody. We want ODM to honor the Memorandum of Understanding of 2013. In the absence of that, forget about NASA. NASA could be Nyanza National Super Alliance. It will not be National Super Alliance, because we will not tolerate it unless that MOU is honored, and this is the bitter truth.
Another ultimatum issued by Minority Leader Francis Nyenze, who also sits in the NASA Steering Committee. What are the implications for NASA as anxiety grows over who will be the coalition's flag bearer? Plus, Parliament now risks dissolution if it does not come up with a law to enforce the two-thirds gender rule within the next 2 months. Just how practical is this? We also go live from multiple locations this morning. Wilkie Sanyabo is in Eldoret. We'll be talking to the people there about the budget. And so will Sam Ogina, who is in Kakamega at the Mumias Sugar Belt. We also have Mombi Waroi at the Treasury buildings. And we also have Francis Gashuri and Patrick Igunza, who are live at the National Assembly. Now, today, the Treasury Cabinet Secretary, Henry Rotich, will outline how the government will raise money to finance Kenya's most ambitious budget yet, a 2.62 trillion shilling budget. There's a deficit of 900 billion shillings already. We'll find out how the government plans to finance the deficit. In the meantime, the Kenya Revenue Authority has been tasked with raising 500 billion shillings. Mombi Waroi is at the Treasury buildings, where he will be expecting to speak to the Treasury Cabinet Secretary. That is also ambitious, Mombi, on such a day. What do you expect?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Hussein. Yes, indeed, we are coming to you live from the Treasury building, where we do expect Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich will be presenting later in the afternoon at about 3 p.m. the budget statement to Parliament, where Kenyans will be able to actually find out what is going on in the budget. And some of the key issues right now, currently the preparations are still ongoing here at Treasury building, and also the Cabinet Secretary is first expected to head to State House, where he shall present the statement to His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, and thereafter he shall come back to Treasury and make the final preparations before heading to Parliament. There are 8 key sectors that will get quite a large chunk of the 2.6 trillion shillings of the budget that will finance 2017-2018, and among those sectors include the security, transport, education and health. And when we look at the Transport and Infrastructure Ministry, they are going to get about 289 billion shillings, and out of which 75.5 billion shillings will go towards the standard gauge railway. That is the second phase of the standard gauge railway. We also have the health sector that is going to receive 61.6 billion shillings. Parliament is also expected to receive quite a chunk, that is 36 billion shillings, and also the IEBC, considering it is an election year, and this is the first time actually that we are able to, Kenya's budget is read earlier, and this is the month of May, or the month of March, sorry, so that they can be able to adequately prepare for the elections, and that is why we have 21.4 billion shillings that will go towards the National Treasury. Why is this budget significant? And the reasons why Hussein this budget is very significant, it is the last one for the Jubilee government. So the Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich has a very huge task ahead of him to ensure that the budget becomes Mwananchi friendly, because from the comments Mwananchi says that they do not feel the impact of the growing economy, and what they expect from the budget is that the cost of living will indeed come down. And also when we look at the Kenya Revenue Authority has been tasked to raise 1.7 billion shillings, and so far 1.7 trillion shillings, and so far they've only been able to raise 1.4 billion. So this is also another huge task that is facing the Kenya Revenue Authority, in as much as they say that the measures that have been put in place to seal the loopholes are adequate for them to actually raise this amount. And also at about, later on, when the Cabinet Secretary comes back from State House, we are going to try get him and get his insights on what Kenyans should expect ahead of this. And this will be during the bulletin once we are able to know when he gets back. And yes, during the day we shall be able to give you details, in-depth details of what we expect from the budget 2017-2018. Back to you, Hussein.
Right, thank you so much, Mombiwa Roy at the Treasury Buildings. Like I said, she is very ambitious today. Just like the ambitious budget estimates, she'll be expecting to speak to Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich, a very busy man today. We cross over now to Parliament, where Francis Kshuri and Patrick Igunza are standing by. Gentlemen, what do we expect?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Hussein Mohammed. As you rightly put it, we are coming to you live from Parliament Building. It is a big day, isn't it, Kshuri?
Absolutely, a big day. The biggest budget in Kenya's history.
2.67 trillion shillings.
That's a lot of money. But the challenge now is, how will this budget be financed? Huge as it is. Does it mean that the ordinary citizen will have to go back to their pockets, dig even deeper to finance this 2.67 trillion shillings budget? 1.7 trillion shillings is the amount of money that the government expects to harvest from all of us in terms of taxes.
That's true.
So that means there's a deficit of about 900 billion shillings. So that means that deficit must be plugged in one way or another. The government will have to borrow even more from external sources and also internal sources. From internal sources, I feel that probably it will become even a little more difficult to get a loan from commercial banks, because most commercial banks will prefer to lend to the government rather than to lend to you, Igunza, because probably you're not as reliable in terms of repayment.
Exactly, and the country cannot run away from the reality that it has a 900 billion shillings deficit, and that is what we expect the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich to tell us exactly how are they going to ensure that they not only have this 2.67 trillion shillings budget, but how the government plans to ensure this money is gotten and actually allocated in a manner that will make sense to the economy.
I see an even bigger burden in terms of debts. 3.6 trillion shillings is the amount of debt that we have as a country. We're now looking at another extra 900 billion shillings. So that's about 4.5 trillion shillings in terms of debts. So the tax burden becomes even heavier. However, what the government has always said is that it is borrowing more to invest more in infrastructural development to spur economic growth, such that eventually people will harvest from the debt that is being incurred. However, the question now is, as we borrow to invest in infrastructural development, a lot of that money also is also being said to go into other avenues in terms of corruption, mismanagement, wastage, a lot of duplication and so on and so forth. So now this calls for prudent management of public resources, such that if a certain amount of money is borrowed to invest in an infrastructural development project, then that money is actually invested there so that Kenyans can start to reap the benefits of that investment and eventually recoup that which they'll have they have incurred in terms of debt. So now this is where the whole question of accountability and transparency comes in, Igunza.
That's true. And shortly before we went on air, you remember we were speaking to some Kenyans here, and their greatest fear, they said, is having perhaps the government come up with measures that will force them to be taxed even more. Remember, the cost of living is very, very high. Recent data from the National Bureau of Statistics indicated that even the most basic of commodities, including unga, sukuma wiki, cabbages, rice, the prices have been going up, and so they fear if the government decides again to come up with tax measures that will make them pay even more taxes. But according to interviews that the CS has conducted previously, he's indicated that this is going to be a budget that will favor Mwananchi, and so people should not fear that they will be burdened even further when it comes to taxation. But also, it is important to say that this is the last budget for the Jubilee administration in its first term in office. So they will probably want to invest a little bit more in some of the projects that they would want to showcase as the success stories of the Jubilee administration in its first term. So you will see a situation where the government will want to invest a little bit more in some of the projects that have been ongoing, that they want to be completed or to be ongoing by the time Kenyans go to the polls in August. That's true. Remember, the Jubilee administration made, or the Jubilee party then, or the Jubilee coalition then in 2013 made very major promises. And the time to account for the promises that they made is coming in August. And Kenyans would want to look at what they promised and what they have been able to deliver. And so it's a race against time. You will see a situation where the government will want to invest a little bit more in some of the promises that they made in 2013, so that by the time Kenyans go to the polls, they can be able to say, we promised this, we may not have been able to deliver it, but the process of delivering it is ongoing. So you must also look at it from the point of view, this is also a campaign budget. It is, and so we might be seeing the government actually going big in terms of spending on aspects like infrastructure development, health, education, security, defense, and aspects like those. And I remember yesterday when I was doing the story on the pre-budget story, rather, we saw quite a substantial amount going towards the completion of the standard gauge railway, which has been one of the greatest achievements for the Jubilee government. But then again, matters to do with education, free primary and secondary education, free maternal health care for the Kenyan mothers, and aspects like those. Do you think that actually this will be a plus for the Jubilee government even as we approach the August polls?
It most likely would be, because this is a scorecard. It's like an examination. The Jubilee administration put itself out there, sought the Kenyan people's votes, and of course doing so with a list of promises. And those promises included free maternal health care, subsidized secondary education, infrastructural development, 10,000 kilometers of tarmac road in 5 years. Questions have been raised on whether these roads have actually been built. The government saying it has so far built 1,950 kilometers of tarmac road, 7,000 kilometers ongoing. But of course, I've heard analysts, economists, even members of the opposition say 10,000 kilometers of road is a very huge investment, and so people should be able to see it. And the question out there is for the government is, when you say 10,000 kilometers of roads have been constructed, 1,950 kilometers of road have been constructed, the idea now is for the government to showcase and say, this road between this point and this point has been constructed. 7,000 kilometers of road that is under construction. It is from this point to this point, from this point to this point. So we will also be trying to see members of parliament what their take is before the minister or the cabinet secretary in charge of national treasury comes to table the budget estimates. But of course, the budget making process has now changed. It's no longer what we used to have in the previous situations. By now we know how much money will be allocated to which specific line ministry or which department or which sector. So now the idea is not what we used to think previously, or what we used to expect previously, that how much money is going to be allocated to education, to infrastructural development, to health, to agriculture, and so on and so forth. That has already been done. So what we await the minister to come and tell us, or the cabinet secretary to come and tell us today, is how this budget will be financed.
Good stuff, and indeed we do have Citizen Television ready to actually scrutinize these figures. We do have experts in studio, and we will be reporting from the field just to ensure that we do make sense of all these figures. Shortly after this particular link, I will be headed to the streets of Nairobi to talk to Wananchi so that we can have a feel of what the expectation is as far as taxation is concerned. But for now, we toss it back to Sayyid Mohammed so that you can engage the experts in studio.
Should I also do like this?
Looks like they're enjoying themselves, almost like a boys' choir. Let's go to another. Let's go to Wilkista Nyabo. She's going to tell us about what farmers are expecting in Eldred today. Wilkista.
Good morning, Hussein. We are in Kenya's bread basket, and there's quite a bit of anticipation about the budget today. Later on in the show, we will just be going down to speak to farmers to get their opinions, their takes, their expectations, what they hope this budget holds for them, what they think their areas of greatest needs are, and whether just to hear what they think will be taken care of in this budget. We will also be speaking to traders and just other members of the public to just find out what they hope will be in this budget, although it is interesting to note as well that there are some who are oblivious. We have spoken to some of them and they say they did not know today was budget day. So we will just be getting opinions from across the board later in the show. Back to you, Hussein.
Do not even know. Very interesting from Wilkes. I don't even know that it's budget day today. Right, we'll cross over later on to Samogina, who is in Kakamega, the Mumia's sugar belt. But back in studio now, below Cairo is a Senator Mandera County. We also have Makali, I said Macau, sorry for that, Makali Mulu, Kitui member MP, also member of the Budget Committee of Parliament, and Zetsewere is a development economist, and Churchill Ogutu, macroeconomist analyst. And I'll start with you, Honorable Below Cairo. And this is the question that goes to all of you. First is the most ambitious budget, 2.62 trillion shillings. I want to get your initial reaction. And do we have an efficient system to fully implement the budget?
Thank you. There's no doubt it's a very ambitious budget. It's the kind of budget that governments do to give an impression of, feel good, make Kenyans feel that they all have been catered for. But in reality, I think the budget making process in our country in the last few years has really become an exercise, a ritual, really, that at best I would describe it as a political instrument for simply showing that this government is doing something. But in reality, what is happening is that the 2.6 trillion has serious issues. One is the question of the funding. Clearly, I think as your colleagues have said, the money that will be raised from ordinary revenue in this country still stands at 1.2 trillion. This is what the President said last month when he addressed Parliament.
Right.
So you're going to raise over 1 trillion shillings. Clearly that shows you that we are living beyond our means straight. Without that simple mathematics, when you want to spend 2.6 and you can raise only 1.2. The second thing is that what happens if you talk to the ministries, if you see the reports of expenditure, the quarterly expenditure reports and so forth, you clearly see that you may have a vote, you may have a budget in a particular ministry, in a particular area or sector, but you actually have difficulty in getting exchequer, actual cash. This is why you find that when the government says we have budgeted over 600, 700 billion shillings for development, invariably you don't spend, the actual absorption is less than much less than half of that in most of the time. So it's become a document that is just prepared, out there so that Kenyans can see that everyone is catered for and everything is. But when you realize it's what will be realized is not even half of what is actually a budget. So I don't really think much about the 2.6.
Right.
That's my view.
Okay, and that's what do you think?
Well, I think as Vilocaro said, I think one of the problems that we're having is that the rate at which revenue generation is growing is nothing compared to the rate at which expenditure is growing. So we're getting growing fiscal deficits, right? And so the government proposed in the budget policy statement to finance the fiscal deficit primarily through domestic financing. If you look at the budget policy statement, they were looking at about just under 60% would come from domestic sources. So I think if you're looking at the sustainability of the budget, the problem is that we've been on a chronic rise of expenditure and a chronic sub-performance on revenue generation. KRA always misses its target.
Yeah.
Now the reason why I think government is leaning towards domestic lending at this point in time is because of the interest rate cap. The interest rate cap has engendered a situation where a lot of the major banks have contracted lending to the borrowing public, because they're perceived as high risk, and a lot of them are running to government as a safe haven for lending. And I think that's why government in that sense is saying, well, this is an opportunity for us to do more borrowing in the local markets. Of course, the problem with that is that it will squeeze our private sector. I think the other problem with the way budget is being done is that the budget that is read usually understates the level of borrowing that is required over the fiscal year. So you'll have, sort of Rotich say that these are the general budget figures. This is how big our fiscal deficit will be, about 7.5% of GDP, I think, for this budget. But when you look at the way supplementary budgets are tabled over the course of the year that continue to increase the expenditure, you begin to see that that figure that you're given at the beginning of the year may not necessarily reflect the amount of debt that we're getting into. And I think part of the problem I think government is having, since this is the first government under devolution, one of the problems they're having is just how expensive devolution is, and sort of the size of the wage bill and the allowances and the benefits, etc. Right. So I think as they try to manage that, the fiscal deficit, in my view, is not going to come down in the short to medium term.
Right. Okay. We'll go deeper into those issues you have raised and Senator Bilokero has raised shortly. First, Makali Mulu. Yes. So, is a member of Parliament, Kitui Central, also a member of the Budget Committee of Parliament. They've already analyzed and scrutinized these estimates. Bilokero says it's just a political instrument. He doesn't think much about the process. What do you think?
I agree with my colleagues in terms of the budget being ambitious. Actually, it's very ambitious. We said if you are just to take about the budget is actually 2.631 trillion. If you are to share that among about 40 million Kenyans, you'll get about 65,000 shillings. So you can see the kind of figures we are talking about. I agree the challenge is the budget being ambitious. The challenge is how to raise the money.
Yeah.
When you look at the details, we are expecting to collect from Kenyans what we call locally generated revenue, about 1.7 trillion in terms of figures. And the balance is, you are saying, about 900 billion.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be either loans borrowed outside. We have to think of where to get that money. But to me, I do agree that budget making has become more of a ritual. And I think we have two challenges, Hussein, as we move forward. One of the challenges is the challenge of implementation. Every year we come up with very huge budgets like the one we have today. But the question is really, do we implement the budget? And I think because this is a statement of intent, that if things work as planned, we should be able to spend all this money. But when you look at the actual expenditure, if you look at the returns we get from the so-called ministries, departments and agencies, you realize that the figures are not good in terms of how much has been spent. And I think to me this is more so because we are so keen in terms of budgeting. We are very good at budget making, but we are not good at what we call monitoring and evaluation, following up to make sure that budgets are implemented. And as I should say, when we are in Parliament, to me this is not actually a last Jubilee government budget, because implementation of this budget will start 1st July.
Regardless of whoever wins.
You will only have a month between elections and implementation. So to me, I think if it's a matter of trying to tell Kenyans what we have achieved, Jubilee government has achieved, then the last 3 budgets will then service. But for this one, implementation will kick off 1st July. So I think we have a lot of challenges. And to me, my major concern is the issue of public debt. Because it's like this, we have, as a country, we have actually, as what I would call expansionary fiscal strategy. Instead of trying to control our expenditure, we are really trying to push the expenditure high, irrespective of where the money will come from. And I think the concern to me more is what we call domestic borrowing. Because as you can see, if you look at the budget, the government is targeting to borrow about almost 300 billion domestically. And what will happen, that is now will almost now is competition between lending to Kenyans
and to the government,
whom by assessment are seen to be higher risk borrowers as opposed to the government. So the government is likely to do what we say, crowding out the private sector, and that will affect investment. It's also is a very tight balancing exercise as we move forward.
Okay, and finally, let me get Churchill Ogutu's reaction as a macroeconomist analyst. Churchill?
I'll tend to agree with my fellow panelists. This budget is quite ambitious, to the tune that it's at a historic 2.6 trillion. I'm looking at it from the revenue side. The government is intending to actually borrow to raise 1.7 trillion shillings, which is 200 billion more than the current fiscal year's budget. The main issue that's coming out, I'm looking at it also from the funding side.
same view with my fellow panelists. The budget fiscal deficit is 900 billion, whereby domestic borrowing is actually has increased from 280 billion to 328 billion. So from that view, there'll be a bit of some crowding out effect from the private sector segment, whereby the latest data is showing that it's at 4.3%, which is somehow at an historic low. So I'm saying that an increase in domestic borrowing will still exacerbate the private sector credit growth, which will also impact on the revenue growth. So it's something that, in as much as they want to raise 1.7 trillion, there's a bit of some uncertainties if it will be able to meet that target.
Right. Okay, and if you can look at those figures very quickly, I mean, 2.63 trillion shilling budget, and as you pointed out, all of you, and as I've said, the deficit is already 900 billion shillings. That is, I mean, that is given the government has to borrow that money. You say 300 billion locally, and we'll hear what the Cabinet Secretary will say today later on in Parliament. But KRA is to raise 1.7 trillion shillings. They have not been meeting their targets, as you know, over the last 4 years. I think the last, they have raised about 500 billion shillings more, if we have to go by the last financial year, so they get to 1.7 trillion shillings. Senator Kero, how is this supposed to happen?
You know, so if you've been around this country, budgets were budgets in the 90s and in the early 2000s, when the tax measures are used to actually balance a budget. But a situation where you draw an expenditure budget and then the gap is automatically, you know, going to be credit, you know, you leave it open. It's no longer a budget. The budget, that balancing of budget through revenue measures, through expenditure cuts, and so forth, it's no longer there. Now you just put in whatever expenditure you want, and then the difference you say I'm going to, it doesn't make sense. The President announced in Parliament our revenue, ordinary revenue. You know, when you talk of KRA revenue, I mean the budget revenue of 1.7, it's not all about ordinary revenue. It's about air in air and so forth. If you remove all that, actual revenue to be raised, it stands at 1.2 trillion. So you're going to raise 1.4 trillion, I mean at least over a trillion shillings through debt. Our debt increased under this government from around 1.2 to nearly 4 by June. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. When you look at how much we have spent the last 4 years, at over a trillion, starting from our budget has been, I think, about 2 trillion for the last 3 years, 6-7 trillion shillings in the last 3-4 years. And you look at how much really has been done in terms of infrastructure that we're talking about. If you look at how much has gone into investments, out of that 6 to 7 trillion, probably 1 trillion is what went to devolution. But I mean, in real terms, really, you don't feel the impact. You don't see the lives of Kenyans changing in terms of their ability to manage. You know, up to now, you find the cost of living is still very high. Unemployment is gone crazy. And Kenyans are really finding it very difficult so you don't really, it doesn't tie up, and we keep looking at figures which don't help us. I've always argued that this 5.9% growth that the government talks about, we're looking at the elitist aspect of our economy, the economy that deals with manufacturing, that deals with telecoms, that deals with one big project of infrastructure that accounts for nearly half of that 5.9%. But we don't really look at the sectors that contribute to the economy of the ordinary Kenyans. If you look at agriculture, which accounts for 80% of the employment, does it ever grow? Has it grown in the last 3 years by close to that 5.9%? No. So when we say, you know, our economy is healthy, we are doing 5.9%, we're actually misleading Kenyans. We're just looking at SGR growth, and we're looking at telecoms and this kind of thing, and the banking sector. In my view, it is not going to be easy. It's going to be borrowing. I mean, it's clear that the government, what is doing nowadays, they want to build this road, they want to put this infrastructure. You call the Chinese, you call anyone who wants to. You've seen this dam, Turkey. It's going to be funded by a company that will raise the funding and do the contract. So we are back to those projects which were outlawed during the days of Moi and Angolo Leasing and Kibaki. We said we should never allow a situation where one company will provide financing, at the same time be the contractor. Now what is happening is, for every mega project, you get a financier who will also be the contractor. A contractor is told get money through Exim Bank from you. So this is what is creating all this huge debt. You know, I agree. When you look at the actual budget in the afternoon, when he tells the MPs, he doesn't talk about the rollover of, for example, debt. Most of these treasury bills or bonds will actually be rolled over. And so, you know, the actual 900 or whatever, 1 trillion will be hidden in those. He'll only show you that we are going to borrow only 300 from domestic, and you know, but in reality what happens is that most of the existing debt is what they will roll over to, so that it then doesn't appear that they are borrowing. But the fact is we are raising 1.2 trillion, we are sinking this country in debt, we are not seeing the benefits. We've been told from 2013 that, you know, this structure will yield.
They've been saying we'll see the benefits over a period of time.
When? I mean, there must be a time frame. You must tell Kenyans you're going to see the benefits from geothermal. We are pumping 53 billion this year into geothermal. Last year is the same, the other year is the same. We must be told you will see the benefits. The cost of energy will actually reduce by this amount. It hasn't. I mean, you are told if you do this, we are going to see the cost of, we are going to see about SGR. The key reason for SGR's investment is that the cost of freight will go down, and therefore the cost of production, so that we can be competitive. But let me tell you, by next year the story will be different, that, you know, the cost of freight will still be high. And so I think there is need to really try and to tie our expenditure priorities to areas that actually benefit the Kenyans, and that doesn't seem to come out. This is why Kenyans are telling you when you interview, they don't feel it, and they don't see the sense of the budget, or they don't see the benefits.
Right. As I say, what do you think of what Biloker is saying? I see you smiling. I mean, and knowing that the government has been talking about infrastructure projects, and they're very big on infrastructure projects, saying we are going to realize the benefits over time, that it has to be done now.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the problems why Kenyans aren't feeling the effect of the budget is because a lot of Kenyans are employed in the informal economy, and a lot of the financing that government does not target that sector at all. Of course, there'll be sort of peripheral benefits from infrastructure development, you know, access to market and access to goods, etc. But I think until the informal economy becomes the lens through which government makes some of its budget and financing decisions, you will find that a lot of Kenyans will not feel that they're part of the process. Now, when you look at the sustainability of debt, you need to understand that there are conflicting arguments as to how sustainable debt is in the Kenyan situation. We're standing at about 52.7 in terms of debt to GDP ratio. We're at about 52.7%. Now, if you ask the IMF, they say that you'll be sustainable until you hit about 74%. If you ask the World Bank, they'll say, well, you'll be sustainable until you hit 64%. But if you look at Treasury's own figure, we don't want to go over 45% in terms of the GDP to debt ratio. So already, if you look at our own standards in terms of how we articulate debt sustainability, the problem is that we're not. And I think the broader concern that I'm having is the unrealistic targeting of revenue generation, and it goes back to the informal economy problem. Government is in a very difficult situation where it's trying to broaden its tax base. Because of the high levels of informality, it's very difficult for government to get the sort of revenue that it requires from the business activity that's being conducted. So I think it's about time that government began to create a reorientation in terms of revenue generation strategy, where they begin to build the informal sector to make it more profitable, to make it more productive, so that they can then get the taxes that are warranted from that sector. But if government continues going to the same tax base and sort of finding creative ways to tax people in a creative manner, then they're going to find a lot of resistance. So there's a double thing of growing debt, and that's intimately linked to the fact that our revenue generation is subpar, and as a result, we're getting closer and closer to this sort of ceiling where now the debt to GDP ratio will begin to hamper economic growth and development.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll go into the issue of public debt shortly. First, let's talk to Sam Ogina, who's in Kakamega County, and now is joined by Kakamega Governor Wycliffe Oparanya. Sam.
Yeah, right, Hussein Mohammed, to the Communications Center. We are in county number 37, Kakamega County, a county with over 740,000 registered voters. And looking at 2013 voting patterns, it is a county that voted overwhelmingly for the opposition, that is Raila Odinga, in 2013. He garnered 3,000 votes, while President Uhuru Kenyatta garnered only 12,000 votes here in Kakamega County. It is a county whereby, if we are talking about Kakamega County, of course, the elephant in the room is the sugar politics. It is, of course, sugar is a cornerstone of the economy here in Kakamega County. It is whereby we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta pumping in 1 billion shillings to try and revive Mumias sugar mills. Of course, the critics saying that was not enough because Mumias Sugar has incurred, I'm being told, or informed for that matter, that Mumias Sugar has a debt of 7 billion shillings. And joining me here is Kakamega Governor Wycliffe Oparanya, just to put things into perspective, the sugar politics and of course the local politics here. Karibu sana to our studios.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes, and to kick it off.
Yes.
President Uhuru Kenyatta, when he was making his forays here in Western Kenya, he pumped 1 billion shillings into Mumias Sugar.
Yes.
And do you think this was a step in the right direction, probably to revive the ailing sugar company?
Yeah, you know very well that the sugar industry has been ailing for the last 7 years. And the Jubilee government came here and they promised to revive the sugar industry. Unfortunately, this has not happened. And you remember when they came around, the president brought 1 billion shillings. And I stood up and said, 1 billion shillings was a drop in the ocean. Mumias needs 12 billion to be able to be on its feet. The 12 billion will go a long way to clear the debt of about 7 billion, and the other will have to revive the agricultural sector in that the outgrowers, you can see around here, farmers are no longer planting sugar again. So we need to inject more money in the nuclear so that there is enough cane for milling. If you go to the nuclear, there's no cane. Around here, there's no cane. So even if you revived Mumias, paid the debts, unless now you motivate the farmers to grow sugarcane, you will be doing nothing. You know very well that agriculture has been devolved. And since agriculture has been devolved, it has been my view that this factory should be handed over to the county government. The 20% shares owned by the national government should be transferred to the county government. So because the county government is now a government that is closer to the people. This is the government that knows the daily problem of farmers in this region. So long as the shares are still at the national level, it is not helping the farmers at the moment. So we have been agitating as locals and as a local leader that the 12% should be transferred and we should be given at least representation at the board level. At the moment, the county government has no representation at the board level. So we can't help unless we are represented there, unless we have someone to give our views at the board level. Yes.
But if at all it is devolved and you are taking charge of Mumias Sugar, do you have an elaborate plan to resuscitate?
Yeah, you remember very well that even the county government put in 200 million shillings to help the farmers. It became politics from the national government. Oh, this money has been eaten, so on, and this money was to help the farmers. And in fact, that time, the county government had planned to put in 500 million. And this 500 million was meant to pay off all the debts of farmers so that the farmers are motivated to plant cane. Now they are not motivated because people deliver cane and it takes months to be paid. Who will be motivated? Someone is waiting to be paid for 6 months, 7 months. They need money to pay school fees. They need money for their daily care. How would they be motivated? And you can see now everywhere, people now are planting maize. Yeah.
You're speaking about 12 billion shillings to make sure that Mumias Sugar is up and running at its full potential. At the same time, you're talking about devolving and the county government will take charge of Mumias Sugar. Do you have that capacity to pump 12 billion shillings?
It is not. It will involve restructuring the Mumias Sugar. You know, in its current state, I can tell you, Mumias Sugar will not be revived. We need to restructure. Maybe start small. Yeah. Because this is a big factory that have been operating under capacity. You remember there are other sugar companies here in the region. There is Botari, there is West Kenya, there is Kibosi here in Kisumu. So there are many factories coming up. And I'm told also there's another factory coming up in Busia. So with all this, we must also think out of the box. Restructure, go small, have fewer farmers that we would motivate, and also, you know, also land is becoming smaller as people increase. The population increases, land is becoming smaller. So we should think out of the box, restructure, and obviously, if you restructure this company, I know there are people out there, there are companies out there who are ready to invest, including the county government, invest in this company. So raising 12 billion to me, if we restructure, would not be a problem.
Well, the other issue is shortage of cane, as you rightly put it, because what I understand is Mumias Sugar right now is not operating to its full capacity because of lack of sugar cane. They are not crushing sugar because they don't have the raw material. Why is this? Has sugar cane become, is not lucrative?
One, it is not lucrative because, you know, farmers are not being paid. So when they are not paid, they are not motivated to grow cane. That is one. Number two, the company itself has no money to invest in sugarcane development. They must invest in sugarcane development. These farmers need extension services. They need fertilizer. They need seeds, cane seeds to plant. You know, all these, there was a fund that used to help farmers through the outgrowers. The outgrower is no longer working. Moko, it used to be called Moko. It has collapsed. So, and the farmers have no money to invest in the cane. So, the company must have money to invest in cane. And the cane is not like maize, where you grow and it takes 3 months. Cane takes 1.5 years. So even now, even if we were to pump the 12 billion, you will not revive Mumias unless there is enough cane. So we must target farmers with develop cane and then clear the debts. When you have a debt of 7 billion, imagine if the interest rate at the current rate of 14%, how much will you be paying every month? At the moment, even workers have not been paid since December. They have a school, a school. Even the teachers have not been paid. So, you know, so this is a collapsed company. So it needs national government to realize that this is a problem for this region, and they sit with us so that we come up with solutions. But you see, they come in as if they are now looking for votes. Now they use it for looking votes. After that, I know they will leave us with this problem. So we have to look at this problem very objectively if we need to help farmers in the Kakamega County and the Western region as a whole.
Well, the sugar issues aside, you are the ODM deputy party leader.
Yes.
And we are seeing whatever is happening in the National Super Alliance. Wiper Party is claiming that ODM is actually undermining it in within the alliance. Why is this?
I don't know why they claim that we are undermining them. One thing, there was this MOU. The MOU was based on the basis that we were going to win an election. We never won an election. So how will you implement an MOU that you never won? So when we never won an election last time under code, then we came to square one. So we have to look at things now differently. And furthermore, let me tell you, in NASA, we have had so many problems. We have agitated, and I'm one of those who have agitated that we must have a joint nomination. Most of these parties have refused joint nomination. So what will we be doing in a coalition where we cannot work together, come together against one enemy? Now, when you come here, Kakamega, every party is running on its own. ODM is running on its own. Fort Kenya, same. Amani, same. And then we pretend that now we are joining at the national level at the 4 principles. To me here, I'm working as ODM, and I will continue to do so. Because if I talk about NASA here, and we are fighting, Alwali is fighting me, Amani is fighting me, then what is the use?
So what are you saying about the National Super Alliance?
And the National Super Alliance is up to the 4 principles. Okay. I can tell you for sure. Those are the 4 principles to decide, up to them. If one of them is a flag bearer, it's up to them. But here now, we are fighting as a party.
And then the other issue yesterday, we saw Francis Nyenge saying that it's either Kalonzo or there's no NASA.
You know, you cannot, if you are in a team, you cannot say it must be me. You must look at all options. Yeah, out of the 4, who is more likely to win? And I don't think if Kalonzo left NASA, he will be actually making any headway to be president of this country. He will be cheating himself. Because obviously if he goes alone, he will not, maybe the best he can do is to force a runoff. And maybe after the runoff, then he can negotiate. Otherwise, to say that he's going alone to win the president of the Republic of Kenya is cheating himself. Yeah.
Well, finally, this region actually voted overwhelmingly for ODM, that is the opposition, in the last election. We've seen Jubilee making forays in Kakamega County, in Western Kenya, as it were. Do you see probably the tide changing, or the opposition still has a strong foothold?
Let me tell you for sure that this region is still opposition. It's opposition. There is Amani, there is ODM, there is Fort Kenya. Jubilee is not here. Whether they come 100 times, and I welcome the president. The president is free. He's the president of the Republic of Kenya to go anywhere. But he has no votes in the Western region. I can tell you. He can improve the percentage, of course. He can improve the percentage a bit, but I can assure him for free that this is an opposition stronghold. Because the people here have realized that very little has been done. And now they are moving around last minute, launching projects. Where were they all these 4 years? Where were they to launch these projects that they are now coming to launch? They bring tractors to make roads. Roads are already have been devolved to counties. They want to light small towns. Is that a lighting small towns? That's the responsibility of the county government. Yeah, and I wonder when they light towns, who will be paying for those bills? After 3 months, you will see those lights off. Unless now they come to us, we negotiate and we agree and we have an MOU. I don't know what they are doing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Asante.
Yeah.
That is the Kakamega Governor, Wycliffe Oparanya, just trying to put things into perspective, saying that despite the numerous forays by the President and his deputy here in Western Kenya, Kakamega County still remains an opposition stronghold, but also saying that within the NASA Alliance, that the NASA Alliance is actually for the 4 principles, saying that ODM, Wiper, Ford Kenya, and Amani National Congress, for that matter, they will continue squaring out at other elective positions, saying that, of course, that super alliance, as it were, there is a deep-seated rivalry within individuals who are contesting for various elective positions, but the National Super Alliance will remain a reserve of the 4 principles. Back to you, Sain, in studio.
Right, Sam, thank you so much. We'll talk about the NASA issues the next 1 hour. Back to budget issues now, and I'll speak now to Makali Mulu. Anzetse and Honorable Vilokero have raised a lot of issues in terms of the public debt. Now, I mean, we heard what the Treasury Cabinet Secretary said, and figures of the Treasury. By the end of this financial year, that is June 30th, it's likely to hit 3.7 trillion shillings. Already we are saying 900 billion, there's a deficit of 900 billion. They're going to borrow definitely. And this is also for all of you. Does anybody really think here that there could be new measures to tax people, and especially in an election year? I'll start with you, Makali.
Yeah, thank you, Sen. I think what I would want to say is that public debt, you know, is not bad, Hussein. What is bad is how you spend the money you get. For example, if you borrow and as Bill Okero was saying, you do the infrastructure, that will actually spur economic growth depending on how you spend the money. But to me, what is critical is that locally we are supposed to generate about 1.7 trillion. Out of that, 200 billion is what we call A in A.
Yeah.
And the 1.5 trillion is expected to be either through taxation.
Right.
Now the big question is, last year we were able to manage to raise about 1.2 trillion.
Yes.
There is a gap of about 300 billion.
Yeah.
And the question is, how can the Treasury, through KRA, raise that money without raising taxes?
Exactly.
There are only two options. One option is to improve efficiency in terms of collection of taxes through what we call improving the tax administration. The other option is that a situation where they can go out there and make sure that Kenyans who are not paying taxes now are actually brought into the tax bracket. To me, those are the only options they can use and not tax Kenyans more. And when you analyze those two options, I don't think they have a lot of room to do that for Hussein.
Right.
So I see a situation where the CS will be struggling with a situation where he has really to tax Kenyans, but at the same time balance also the issue of politics. But Hussein, before, I just want to say this, Hussein. For the last 3 years, if you look at what I call the themes of the various budgets we have done, Jubilee government has come up with what we call the transformative agenda. And in this transformative agenda, they had identified 5 pillars which are supposed to help them achieve the agenda. One of them was promoting business environment, investing more in infrastructure so that we have industrial growth, investing more in agriculture so that we sustain the economy, because agriculture is the mainstay of the economy.
Yeah.
The other one we said was the issue of manufacturing, so that we create employment. And the last one was growing rural economies through devolution. Now, when you look at those 5 pillars we said, I think other than the one of the infrastructural development, the other 4, in terms of funding, have received very minimum funding. And as a result of that, you realize that we cannot achieve much as we had planned.
Yeah.
And to me, I think what we need is a serious prioritization of the activities we are doing as a country. We said knowing very well, like when you look at this current budget, agriculture has only been allocated about 50 billion.
Right.
We know agriculture has been devolved. That's true, as the governor was saying. But if you analyze the county government budget, the question is, how much is going to agriculture? And we know very well it's the mainstay of the economy. You realize it's also not much. So if the mainstay of the economy is not getting the right funding, then how do you grow the economy? And I agree with the Honorable Senator that that's the reason Kenyans are not filling this budget. We are talking about trillions every year. But when you talk to Kenyans,
right,
they're not feeling.
They are concerned about the infrastructure projects. Honorable Kerry kept on asking, when are we going to realize anything? When are we going to feel the benefits? You've talked about them and you're saying it's important. Are they still important to you, and you think, as the government says, that we will realize the benefits later on? That it matters now, yes, we have to go through this problem of a huge public debt to fund these infrastructure projects, and later on we're going to realize the benefits.
You know, I think the challenge we have, actually, if you just do simple economic theory, it says if you invest in infrastructure, you are likely to get more growth. But what is happening, the problem is what Kero was talking about, Santa Kero. The issue of, for example, let's get the loan we've taken from China. Now, you get a loan from a government, the government provides a contractor, and they supply all the materials. So the only money which Kenyans will access is also only money for labor. So what happens? You realize, instead of, because if we are buying materials from Kenya, the contractor is a different person, that at the end of the day, you'll have more resources being redistributed to all sides of Kenya, and then that will grow the economy. But very little is coming, despite this huge borrowing. And I think as a country, we really think seriously about this policy of borrowing from a government, getting that government becoming the contractor, and all procurement is down out there. We only see the equipment coming here, because even fighting for money in terms of auditing might be doubtful.
Right. Churchill, the issue of taxation again. I mean, inflation has hit a 4-year high. It's now 9.04%. That is from February, up from 6.99% in January. And of course, most of what is pushing this inflation is cost of food prices. Is it an option? It's an option, yes, to raise taxes, but do you think it's possible?
Well, I think it's not possible to raise taxes. Looking at it being an election year, first of all, it won't be more of broadening the tax base, but it will be more of deepening the the current tax base that is right here. If right now I'm able to pick a shilling from you, what are the avenues that I can now be able to get a 2 shillings from you? So it all boils down to what Anzanse had said, that we can also look at in terms of the informal sector, what extent are we not doing to be able to get the tax from them.
Although they have been failing, I mean they've been even failing to meet their targets, and as Makali has been pointing out, yes, that is an option, but clearly it's not happening. Over the last 4 years, KRA hasn't been meeting its targets, and one of the key issues has been to broaden the tax base and to bring in the informal sector. They're not really realizing that, are they?
Yeah, they're not realizing. I'm looking at the figures at the half-hour mark in the current fiscal year. The receipts were at a tune of 591.17 billion against a prorated of 660 billion. So of course there's a shortfall, and looking at the previous years, there's been a bit of a shortfall. So it will be a bit of a challenge trying to meet that ambitious target. Looking at it also, the citizen base is actually weighed down by inflation. As you said, that it's currently at a 4-year high at 9.04%. This is basically unmasking the routes of the drought effects, considering that the huge chunk of it was the food inflation. Remember, for a common mwananchi, a huge chunk of normal expenditure goes towards the food, the volatile items like the fuel, the kerosene and the likes. So that's the bit which actually took a bit of a huge segment of the higher inflation. Because if you look at it compared to the core inflation, there's a bit of an inverse, whereby it came down 80 basis points to 3.7%, meaning that there's a bit of a low demand in this economy to drive upwards also in terms of the GDP, which will also be able to trickle down into higher receipts in the tax revenue. So to that extent, I'm feeling that there will be a bit of much pressure for the KRA actually to hit its target in terms of the revenue collection.
Right.
You know, Sen, yeah. I think in terms of tax, I actually think KRA, without even the government doesn't need to raise the taxes. If KRA, you know, the tragedy we have in this country, the people who are given to run institutions are appointed based on political expediency, and you end up with incompetent people. But if KRA there was no corruption in KRA today,
and many people are talking about that actually.
If there's no corruption in KRA today, 300 billion, raising 300 billion additional money is not going to be a problem. But I can tell you for a fact, and I've said this and I've put it even in my columns, that KRA is rotten to the core today. It's not the KRA we had a few years ago. I'll give you an example. For instance, county governments spend substantial amounts of money on contracts, on procurements, and so a lot of money gets deducted, you know, the withholding taxes and so forth, nearly 9% for every contract. Do you know that KRA has actually, the guys who are sent to go and correct, and I give you an example in my own county, we have written in writing to KRA, that county has spent nearly 15-20 billion on development, on contracts, and find out how much of that money has actually, the 9% that is deducted from contractors, from suppliers, VAT and withholding tax, is actually being remitted to KRA. You'll be surprised, there's nothing. So every officer who goes there gets his little bread and comes back. And it's happening across the 47 counties. If you go to the port of Mombasa, it's worse. So there is really need to, and we've told the CS Treasury in my own committee, they need to do something about KRA if they want to realize revenue. So I think the challenge is not about really raising taxes, it's about collecting revenue. Everyone knows that these days, you know, revenue collection is not what it used to be because of the corruption.
But do you expect that to change anytime soon?
I don't expect, with the kind of mindset we have in the government, really everyone protecting its persons and, you know, people being appointed on the basis of, you know, the mathematics in government, it's not going to change. So I don't think we need to raise taxes. I think we need to enhance efficiency in tax collection.
Right.
That's what we need to do.
So that you don't think will happen? Already you're saying, we all know there's you've said, I mean, the public debt levels are alarming. From where you stand, Senator Bilokero, what do you think then the Treasury Cabinet Secretary will do this?
To borrow.
What will you
I mean, they've done that. They've done that so well.
Just borrowing again and raising the
They've done it so well. It's the easiest thing to do. Really, I mean, these days there's also an incentive for borrowing. I'll tell you, I'll go back to that dam project. 2 years ago, that dam was on the newspaper, struck a dam. They wanted 28 billion to do it. Today you are told 60-something billion. When this KPC project was coming up, we were being told it was less than 15-20 billion. Now you hear about 40 billion. I mean, you know, once you get into a situation where you're looking for loans and you know, and the contractors financing themselves, you look at money, you're not going to have a problem. So I think they are going to borrow. That is one. Two, what they are going to do is to starve the ministries and other public institutions so that you actually don't get exchequer. You actually have the budget, but you don't get. So when the minister tells you that the ministries are not spending money, the reason is not because nobody wants to spend money, but the reality is that you can't get exchequer, you can't get cash. And so that is one way of you know, you've got a 2.6 trillion, but in reality what you're going to spend, particularly in the development, it is going to be much less. Right. You know, you won't realize it.
And if we can look at that development budget again, I think it's 640.8 billion shillings. Roads getting 134.9 billion shillings. Again, it's big on infrastructure. Southern Gauge Railways at 5.5 billion shillings. We also have the phase 1 of SGR, 15.5 billion shillings, that is to Mombasa, Nairobi. The port, 16.7 billion shillings. Housing, 2.9 billion shillings. Public works, 1.9 billion. Energy, 53.27 billion shillings. Again, big on infrastructure. And that's where then, so how do you strike this balance? What do you do? Honorable Kero is talking about, I mean, he doesn't see this happening any other way except borrowing.
Yeah.
What is the best practice?
We are going to borrow. I think there are a couple of things going on here that we need to balance. The first is the type of debt we're getting into is a bit different to what we used to get into. We're getting into a lot of private debt. A lot of our debt used to be with bilateral and multilaterals, which at some point, you know, we were forgiven. Yeah, and it's concessionary. We're getting into mainstream debt with private creditors, and they don't have the patience that some of these multi and bilaterals have. They will demand their payment when it is due, precisely at commercial rates. So I think one of the problems we're getting into is the type of debt. Now you have to remember, when this debt hunger started, there was the rate of lending in the international market was a bit lower because Europe and America were so suppressing their economic activity that the yield hunters came to Africa and other parts of the world to get their money. So we were getting it at a fairly affordable rate. That has changed now. Those economies are slowly recovering, etc. So we're getting into a lot of expensive private sector debt that does not have any patience. I think the second problem that we're having is this continued obsession with infrastructure. I think one of the problems that we're having as an economy is that we are services-led. Right? We're a services-led economy. Employment is agriculture, don't get me wrong. But if you look at contribution to GDP, over 60% comes from services. And our manufacturing sector continues to be neglected. And I think one of the problems that I'm having is that the type of spending is not going to reorient the economy to be more manufacturing-led with a coherent strategy on how we're going to get more productivity out of people and how we're going to build incomes. Because the problem a lot with services is that it doesn't employ a lot of people. If you look at services outside of education, hospitality and health, it's a very trim sector in terms of employment and building incomes. So one of the concerns I'm having is that we've been building infrastructure now for 10 to 15 years, right? And the sort of the jump that we wanted to see in terms of stimulating economic growth is not happening. So one of the things that I'm saying and I'm suggesting to government is that could we spend a bit more of that money on revitalizing the manufacturing and industrial sector of this country to generate the sorts of productivity that we can have and really look at export orientation for manufacturing in terms of AGOA, but more importantly in terms of inter-African trade and meeting those needs. So one of my problems is not only that we're going to borrow, is that we're getting into a type of debt that's very impatient and unforgiving, and also we're still spending money on the same things that still haven't delivered the growth that they were meant to deliver. So some reorientation is required, in my view.
Right. Honorable Makali, finally.
Yeah, you know, Hussein, to a normal Kenyan, a citizen somewhere in Wajir, what they need is money in their pockets and to see their sons, when they complete any level of education, be able to be employed. Hussein, look at the tourism sector. Research has confirmed that for every tourist who visits Kenya, about 3 opportunities for employment are created, Hussein. Now, such a sector which can generate a lot of employment for Kenyans, when you analyze, you find that it's also doing very poorly. So to me, I want to say, this idea of reprioritization and getting our priorities as a country right, irrespective of the politics we are playing. One of the challenges we have is there's a lot of mix between politics and economics. And you can see even from the way my panelists are saying, it's like we have given up on corruption. That since KRA is so corrupt that they cannot collect taxes, then we have given up. They say ways to borrow. But why? Look at what the governor was saying, Governor Kakamega, about Mumias. He wants more money from the exchequer to go and build out Mumias as a company. The big question is, what drove Mumias to that level? And I think as Kenya we need to say enough is enough, and stop this idea of using good money to chase bad money. Because as long as we continue that one, we remain in a hole, we'll never move, and our future generations will continue being indebted to at very high levels. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Makali Moli, who is the Member of Parliament, Kitui Central, also member of the Budget Committee of the National Assembly, Senator Bilo Kero, Chair Finance Committee of the Senate, and also Senator Mandera County, and that's where is the development economist, and Chachi Luguto, macroeconomist analyst. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning, and we'll continue analyzing the budget later on Citizen Extra. We take a short break now. In the next hour, we talk about NASA politics, the Honorable Francis Nyenze's remarks and what they are causing in NASA, plus the remarks by Kalonzo Musyoka, people questioning whether it's threatening NASA's unity. We're back after this.